Hello once again, Internet. This week we're going to take a trip to the city of Miiiist. I'd been looking forward to going here for a while because it's fairly close to the Ixar home of Cabalus, and for once I won't have to complain about everyone killing me on sight. I decided instead of spending hours running/boating back to Cabalus that I'd try and find an evac to Emerald Jungle. So, druids and wizards get spells that enable them to evacuate their groups out of dungeons to safety if shit hits the fan. Instead of the evac taking you to a certain point outside of the dungeon you cast it in, there are a few evac spells that take you to specific location. So essentially, as long as you're in a dungeon on the same continent, you'll always be taken to the location associated with the spell every time, regardless of the distance from the dungeon you are in. So in this case, we're going for the one in Emerald Jungle. Now, I didn't know how any of this worked at the time of the footage you're watching right now, so I feel incredibly bad because I only had like 30 platinum to give this ever so kindly druid who took me, and I feel like he deserves so much more. So, the process when going from anywhere that's not Kunark is to port to the Dreadlands, and then run all the way to the closest dungeon, which is Karnal's Castle, so you can then use Evacuate. This is why I felt bad for the druid, because it's not just as simple as clicking the button and then ending up at your destination. You still kind of have to take a roundabout trip. So, thank you, Shiltan. If you ever see this, I really appreciate the ride, mate. Once I landed in Emerald Jungle, I decided instead of heading straight to Com, I would head back home to Cabalus to bank, bind, and then finally train Riposte, which I was like 5 levels late for. Now this is where my Peggy cloak really starts pulling its weight. Emerald Jungle is a pain in the ass for me, and I still get lost sometimes heading to Com after leveling there for like 2 weeks now. The whole place is pretty much covered in dense jungle, and it's really hard to kind of make out any landmarks. Usually after entering from the Field of Bone, I just point myself slightly northeast-ish and just run in a straight line and hope that I hit the castle. Emerald Jungle is also filled wall to wall with roaming animals and monsters, and it's really easy to start stacking up aggro and mobs as you pass through. The city of Miiiist was once the pinnacle of Ixar construction. It was built under the guidance of Lord Rakashir, shortly after the fall of the Shishar. In its time, the city was known as Torsis. Lord Rakashir gradually lost faith in his god Kazakh Thul due to the betrayal of his wife and the death of his son. This led to the demise of the city. The magics that suspend the great halls above the castle are lost to time, but they are just as impressive now as they were when they were first made. The once great city of Miiiist is now home to a host of undead, golems, reavers, and all other sorts of monstrosities. Some of its temples and towers have withstood the test of time, and the spirits of the king and the queen still remain. The zone is split up into 4 different camps. Towards the entrance, you have the stables and the temple. These 2 spots have their own set of mobs that spawn within each camp, and then the 2 groups usually fight over anything that spawns in the courtyard between them. Next, you have the arena. This is in the middle of the zone. This area has a big temple-like structure in the center, which has a bunch of spawns inside it, as well as a PvP arena in the middle. Outside of that, there are 2 longhouses at the back up against the wall, which also have a number of spawn points each. The longhouse spawns are often taken by the moat group, as they sometimes contain higher level mobs than the arena group can handle. And finally, up the back of the zone, you have the moat. This camp sits at the door of the castle and has access to all of the surrounding spawns. This is the highest level of the ground camps, and it's usually the best XP due to the flow of monsters. There are also often players who will solo or hunt in small groups on the upper levels of the castle, but they're always in their mid to high 50s. As I mentioned in the previous video, this zone is very popular. Sometimes it takes a while to get into a group, which led me to try my hand at soloing. There are a few easily split spawns at the entrance, and soloing can actually be decent XP while waiting for a group. None of the mobs flee at low health, so you don't have to worry about adds unless there's a train to the zone line. The only problem is the entrance mobs are all part of the courtyard area, which is free game to whichever group tags them first. So, due to the nature of soloing and having a lot of downtime while recovering from each fight, the monsters are often tagged before you are ready to face the next one. One of the times I was soloing out the front, waiting for a group, I ran into a chamois who was also looking for group. We decided to head out to the Emerald Jungle to duo because there were just too many people running around inside. Emerald Jungle is a nice place to grind if you have the tools. Duoing with a chamois works really well out here, We just set up camp next to the zone line, and I ran out into the jungle and just pulled the first things that I saw and took them back to the camp. There are a lot of strange and interesting creatures to fight out here, and it beats sitting around doing nothing while waiting for a group. The first day I was here, I ran into Orson, who you might have seen in my Mistborn videos. I joined with him and a cleric named Marrow, and the three of us just started camping the stables. Everything in this zone is pretty easy to split apart, so we had no problems just killing singles, and even when we got a double or so, the cleric could just root one off to the side as a form of crowd control, and that worked really well. It wasn't long until the group kind of started to fill out a bit more. We got another monk, and then a pally, and even a druid. A few more familiar faces from Mistborn as well. At one point, the druid even gave us all wolf form, which is something you don't see very often, but it's actually quite handy because apart from the movement speed bonuses you get, it also increases your attack slightly, so pretty good for a kind of heavy melee focused group. This is one of the temple groups I had. I've grouped at this spot several times, but this is probably one of the better groups that I had. We were absolutely crushing this place, and the zone wasn't overflowing with people, so we weren't starved for mobs to pull, which can happen quite often here. And as a bonus, we had some people who were on the list, on the waiting list for the group. Sometimes people will just sit there and wait, and go AFK or whatever, but sometimes they'll just attack because, they don't want to just sit around and be bored, so that kind of added a nice little bonus. We had some guys waiting on the list who were just kind of helping us out kill stuff. Next up is the arena. I only grouped her here one time, I think, but it was a pretty fun spot. This is where you first kind of start dipping into the higher end mobs of the ground level. You start getting some level 45-ish mobs here as opposed to the level 40s who are on the front half. I also really like the layout of this camp. The arena itself is this kind of circular pillar type building that has a door on both sides, so you can kind of set up camp on whichever point you want around that. I know that bards really like this spot because they can solo the entire camp due to the big open circular space that they use to kite the mobs around. As I mentioned before, this camp also has these kind of longhouses. There's two of them. This one in particular has 3 goo spawns, and they're the mobs that are like level 45-ish, so sometimes they can be a bit much for the arena group to handle themselves, but the other side has 2 double pools of skeletons / ghosts. And last but definitely not least, this is the moat. And this is probably where I've spent the most time, and it's also by far my favourite spot here in the City of Mist. Now, I know I kind of skimmed over the other camps here, but that's because I want to spend most of my time talking about this spot. The layout of this camp is pretty fantastic if you have levitate, so again, my Peggy cloak is really quite invaluable for pulling here. The group usually sets up on the left side of the castle door. It's always the left side because if someone falls into the water, there's a hole in the wall down there where you can get out. There are 2 spawns in each of these gazebo type things along this walkway, as well as 2 patrolling spawns that pat in between the 2 gazebos. Then on each wall at the start of the walkway there is a spawn, and then down on the back wall you also have another 3 spawns on each side. The entire camp is symmetrical. So the reason this camp is so great with levitate is all the mobs, except for a few of the ghosts, can't follow you across the water. So when you engage a mob and then run over the moat back to the group using levitate, the mob has to run all the way around. This is the reason you often see enchanters pulling for the moat groups, because with their air elemental form, they can go absolutely mental kiting and mezzing as they make mobs chase them back and forth over the moat. I think almost every time I've grouped here, I've had an enchanter in the group. It just seems like they're in super high demand for the moat. Apart from them being mana batteries, haste dispensers, and epic crowd controllers, they also tend to charm mid-level golems, which adds a really nice chunk of DPS to the party. Also learnt a nice little trick from one of the enchanters I grouped with here. This pet is using a 2-handed sword, but as you can see in its offhand it's holding a torch. Now torches aren't weapons, they're just an item that you buy from a vendor and they cost like 1 silver. But it somehow tricks the game into thinking that the pet is now dual wielding. So then it gets to quad attack because it swings twice for each arm. But enchanters aren't the only ones who can show off their tricks here. As always, there's a bunch of stuff in the monk's bag of tricks that can be put to good use. For example, most of these groups can be easily split using sneak and levitate. Here at these gazebos, if you slightly run off the edge and you're behind one of the mobs, you can single pull the other one with sneak and then run back over to your group. There are 4 mobs at each of these hairpin turns that can be split with sneak also. The trick is positioning yourself out of the direct line of sight of as many of the mobs as you can and then pulling. Another trick I like to use in a group without an enchanter is what I like to call monk crowd control. Now, if you remember last week how I went over the mechanics of using feigned death and mobs re-engaging and all that kind of stuff, well, this time around I'm using that to my advantage. So keep an eye on my sneak button in the bottom left corner and then watch what these mobs are doing up on the back wall. Because they had not fully reset, I was using the trick where I sneak while still attacking. My method was to wait until they had walked almost back to their spawn point, then I would drop sneak, watch them run all the way back up towards us. By the time they got to the gazebo, I would feign death. In this particular instance, the group was ready for the next mob, so using sneak, I pull him and then run across the water. This lets me get to the other side without being hit, because the mob has to take the long way around, and because I don't get hit, sneak doesn't drop off, so the other 2 keep wandering back to their spawns. Now once they're far enough down, I can drop sneak and they start turning around and heading all the way back to me. Once they get back to the gazebo, I feign death again and reapply sneak. This can be rinse repeated as long as necessary. This trick is especially handy when using it on the goos from the arena house. Because it's such a long distance, it takes a long time to run all the way back and forth to pull them one at a time. But if I juggle them up and down the corridors here, it's essentially like having them mesmerized and ready to fight one at a time. Another handy little trick monks can do, if you're running out of mobs to kill, is pull mobs from behind the castle door here. This door is locked and requires a key to get into. It's also got a black reaver inside, which is a high-end level 50 or so mob. Normally standing anywhere near this door is a no-no, because it can cause all sorts of problems if you aggro the stuff inside. But as a monk, if you run up to the door and crouch, you can pull everything inside. Then, if you get your group to stay well clear and to one side, you can drag all the mobs down the other side and then split them apart. Add an enchanter to this mix and you can stack yourself up an extra 6 or so mobs while you wait for everything outside to respawn. I've had a lot of different groups at the moat over the weeks that I've been leveling here. One of the more interesting groups was during off-peak when we couldn't find people to fill out all the spots. We had 2 monks, a mage and a necromancer, and the necro being the star of the show in this scenario. He was healing us and mesmerizing mobs as well as DPSing at the same time. It was pretty amazing that a group like this could function with almost no downtime. There are a lot of good weapons that drop here. The one-handed smite staves that I used to use when I was lower level, they drop from in here, as well as a whole number of other weapons. Some are really good, others are kind of average. And because the City of Mist is so popular, these items are kind of oversaturated, which means they're quite cheap to acquire. This can be a good or a bad thing, I suppose, depending on how you look at it. The mobs also all have a chance to drop jewels and jewellery, which can vendor for quite a lot. The most common system is to roll for drops like this. I've yet to come across groups that use alphabetical order or something like that, probably due to the high turnover rate of group members. So the last thing I wanted to cover before I wrap this up are trains. Trains are a common occurrence in EverQuest due to the way dungeon zones work. If you don't know what a train is, basically when a group pulls more than they can handle, to avoid dying, they have to run to the zone line to escape. In EverQuest, mobs don't drop aggro unless you kill them, you die, or you leave the zone. So people running to the zone with a bunch of mobs after them, they'll also aggro any mobs along the way. This creates a kind of snowballing train. it runs towards the zone line, and it'll usually wipe out any group in its path. I've seen a few big, nice, chunky trains, a few that have wiped out even my groups. Luckily, with Feigned Death, I can just kind of sit back and enjoy the show. I always end up cleaning up afterwards by dragging any corpses to the zone line. That will pretty much be it for this week, guys. I don't know what I'll do next week. I'm going to try and push through 45 and onto 50. I'll probably head to Karnal's Castle once I'm 50. But in the meantime, I'm thinking about working on some quests. Once I get a little closer towards 50, stuff like the Old Sebulus Key and also maybe some Temple of Ro armor quests for my cleric. Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't be scared to drop me a comment on YouTube or send me a tell in game. If you like this video, I usually put one of these out every week, so hit subscribe for more, and I will see you next time.